Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the course of 14th to 18th century poetry. The topic for today's discussion is Allegory in Book 1 of the Faerie Queen, and this lecture is the part first of the series of lecture on Allegory in Book 1 of the Faerie Queen. I am your teacher Muhammad Asif Khan, Lecturer, Department of English, Cohort University of Science and Technology. The agenda for discussion is that first of all, I will introduce the Faerie Queen as an allegory, and then I will define that term allegory to you. After that, I will give you the explanation of the allegorical meanings of characters of the Faerie Queen, and we will also study the allegorical meanings of the events of the Faerie Queen. So let's start with the introduction of Faerie Queen as an allegory. We see that on the literal side, the Faerie Queen is the story of a knight, and he is the Knight of Red Cross. And we see that this very night he passes through, or he goes through great tests and trials, and he fights number of furious monsters throughout this book 1. And this very story is very interesting and entertaining to the readers as a story of heroic deeds. But we see that more important reason or the purpose for writing this Faerie Queen is its allegorical meanings, and we see that there are meanings behind its characters and the events that are happening in this very story. So for explaining that concept, I will first of all define the term allegory to you. An allegory basically is a literary device, and we use allegory in a narrative in which a character or a place or event and that is described in that narrative is used to convey and is used to deliver a broader message about the real world problems, issues and happenings. So we see that authors have used this allegory to narrate or to convey broader message about the issues and the occurrences of the real world in all forms of literature. And these very allegories are used to illustrate or convey the complex ideas and concepts in such a way that these very concepts, complex concepts and ideas, converts into a comprehensible or very interesting one to the viewers, readers or the listeners, because we are saying that allegory is not restricted to literature only, but we see that all forms of art has used allegory as a mean to explain or illustrate the complex ideas. So therefore we see that authors from all forms of the art has used this very technique to convey and to deliver the message about the issues and happenings of the real world. Dear student, the same happened in the Faerie Queen, and we see that Spenser himself wrote this Faerie Queen as an allegory, and he has a very clear aim behind that, and he explained this end or aim in his letter to Sir Walter Raleigh. And Spenser has designed an allegory that is susceptible, or we can say that is being written to give us twofold interpretation. On the one hand, we see it gives us a historical interpretation that is dealing with the religious and political events of the Spenser time, And on the other, we see that this very allegory of the fairy queen that expresses or interprets a moral and spiritual interpretations. So that very moral and spiritual interpretation deals with actions and interactions of the virtues and vices. Fairy Queen is not a simple romance. It is an allegory with a definite end. It has objectives to convey the meanings and to convey the message about the issues and happenings of the world. So we see that Spencer is explaining the complex ideas that were happening in the society of that time. These very events were concerning the religious, political, and moral issues of that very society, and he expressed these very ideas allegorically in his poetic work, The Faerie Queen. Let's move towards the events and characters in The Faerie Queen that expresses the different meanings on the different grounds. We see that Red Cross, who is the hero of Book 1, and he is being introduced by the Spencer in the Canto 1 of the Book 1 of the Faerie Queen, and Spencer introduces him as the Knight of Holiness. This Knight of Holiness will go through the great trials and tests, and he has to fight the furious monsters throughout the book. However, the important purpose of the Faerie Queen is something different from that, and we see that the title character of the book, that is the Faerie Queen herself, is meant to represent Queen Elizabeth. So the title character is itself a representation of some other character, and that it symbolizes Queen Elizabeth. The other thing is that the setting of the story is in a fanciful fairyland. It also emphasizes its allegorical meaning, and we see that this very fairyland is meant for a land that is very close to the Spencer's homeland, and from that I means that Spencer wants to represent England as a fairyland. So in the Faerie Queen Book 1, these characters are having hidden meanings. In the beginning of the Book 1, Faerie Queen has another character, that is Lady Una, and she is the only daughter of her parents, and she is the sole heir. Seeks the help of the Faerie Queen to give her a knight that could liberate her parents from the captivity of a dragon. Here we see that Faerie Queen appoints the Knight of Red Cross to assist that lady, and the Knight of Red Cross is nothing else in the allegory but the embodiment of holiness. So we can also see that the Knight of Red Cross also represents the individual Christian, and that very Christian who is on the search for holiness. And we see here that this very Christian is armed with the faith in Christ, and the shield with that bloody and red color cross on that, it represents the faith in Christ, the Holy Christ. As I told you that Lady Una seeks help from the Faerie Queen. She is basically the representation or embodiment of truth, and her parents that are captivated by an evil dragon, they represent humanity, and that evil dragon who captivated the parents of Lady Una, that represent the evil. This very story of Lady Una is basically that holiness seeks to champion the cause of truth, and it wants to reinstall the truth on its ancient throne that is the heart of human race, and that is held in control by the mighty force of evil. We see that holiness is trying to reinstall truth on its ancient throne, that is the breast or the heart of the human grace. But we see that holiness, like the Knight of Red Cross in the story, has first to seek its own perfection through the trials of its strength against its many adversaries. And from adversaries, I mean that the knight has to face many challengers, many opponents, and the enemies or the foes that he has to counter during his journey. So the Knight of Red Cross has first to deal with error, that is manifold, very foul and contemptible, whose den is basically human heart, which error has filled to its springs. So we see that holiness overcomes error in a very dreadful encounter, but through a great deal of hardship and much of risk to its own life, we see that this knight overcomes the errors. For a Christian, we can explain the same event in another way, that for a Christian to be holy, he must have true faith. So the plot of this book 1 mostly concerns the attempts of evildoers to separate Red Cross, that is the embodiment of holiness, from Una, who represents the truth, and all these evildoers are trying to separate them. And the most dreadful or most terrible enemy for these two, the holiness and truth, is the hypocrisy. And we see that it is far more difficult to overcome, because its real character remains unknown to us. And this hypocrisy is represented by a very treacherous and guileful and hateful archimago, that is outwardly holy, but in the heart this archimago is a villain, whose appearance and nature are totally different, because we see that archimago in appearance is very holy person, but in nature he is a great villain. When we see that holiness and truth they meet hypocrisy, they are very soon misled by its false looks of holiness and piety, because we see that hypocrisy pretended simplicity, and it attracted both the holiness and truth into its that trap of veils, tricks and treachery, and he is using its artful engines to put them into the despair. We see that this hypocrisy first separates holiness from the truth by creating doubts and misgivings, and then deals with each of them separately, because finding them deprive of their united strength. It is very easy for hypocrisy to detract them. Once holiness and truth separated, holiness is exposed to the opposite of truth, that is falsehood. Having been separated from truth, that is the true companion of the holiness, we see that holiness encounters infidelity. From infidelity I mean faithlessness, that is represented by Sansfoy, who is basically a pagan knight, and that pagan knight is being accompanied by a fair seeming falsehood, that is represented by Duessa, and this very lady is decorated with all sorts of finery to bewitch with its appearance all the virtues that lack firmness. And we see that she easily deceived Knight of the Red Cross wherever he is lacking. if he lacks that firmness in his virtues, we see that he is deceived by, he is bewitched by that falsehood of Duessa. The Knight of Holiness, or the Knight of Red Cross, in its encounter with faithlessness or infidelity, easily gains success. But we see this holiness falls an easy victim to the charms of the falsehood. That falsehood represented by the lovely looking maiden Duessa, who falsely named herself as Fidessa, that means faithfulness. And here he is separated from its true friend, and now he is in company of falsehood. In this image we see that Red Cross may be able to defeat or overcome the strength of Sensfoy, who is representing faithlessness, through his own native virtues, as we see that he is separated from the truth, but he falls prey to the charms and deceit of falsehood. So this is the first result that befalls holiness as soon as it loses the friendship of or companionship of the truth. Holiness now takes falsehood to be its companion and offers its love and respect to an unworthy object. Falsehood is an unworthy object, and holiness is offering or taking falsehood as its companion. So this is the fortune of holiness when separated from its true friend, that is truth. On the other side, we see that truth is separated from holiness, and that truth also suffers the same kind of misfortunes. Encounters with the lion, though it has no name in this fairy queen, and this lion is also a part of Spencer's Allegory. This lion represents the brutish nature, or we can say it represents the natural law, which may be violent at times, but is basically sympathetic to the Christian truth. As we see that initially it was trying to attack Lady Una, but when it sees the face of Lady Una, it gets sympathetic to that lady, and then joins this lady in his company. But we see that in the absence of the support of holiness, this lion, which represents the brutish nature or the violence, comes to the aid of truth and accompany truth in his journey. And we see that this lion, or this natural reason of man, or the primitive courage of untutored man, that easily helps truth to subjugate the blind devotion that is being represented by the blind character for the fairy queen, that is Korska, and it also easily overcomes another character, that is deaf and dumb daughter of Korska, that is Abessa, who represent abjectness. And this lion tears into pieces Kerkripine, the church robber. These characters are basically the representation of monasticism. Abessa recalls the word abbess, the head of an abbey, and this very monastic character is a feature of that Catholic Church. And we see that in Spencer's times, these monasteries were often accused of taking donations to the poor for themselves. And here the Abessa's deafness and dumbness and Korska's blindness display Spencer's belief that monasteries, the monks, friars, and the nuns, they are ignorant of the needs of the world, and they are living in isolation, and just they are concerned with their own needs, and we see that greed in the character of that church robber Kirkepine. So dear students, all these characters are the representation of the different aspects of the monasteries. Dear students, we see that truth that is deprived of the support of holiness now is being supported by violence or the natural reason of the man, or the primitive courage of the untutored man has overcome some of the things, but actually this truth cannot long stand on its own legs without the support of holiness. And very soon we see that hypocrisy wears the looks of holiness and gains for itself the love which the truth formerly owed to the actual holiness. And Una was deceived by Archimago, and she takes Archimago, who is disguised as the Knight of Holiness, and after that we see that Una is accompanied by that knight. So here Spencer wants to tell us that hypocrisy wears the looks of holiness and gains for itself the love which truth formally has to the actual holiness. Here hypocrisy, represented by Archimago, undertakes to be the champion of truth, but the hollowness of the hypocrisy is soon uncovered by one of its own followers, and his name is Sensloi, who represents lawlessness or unrighteousness, and he subdues hypocrisy. And the reason for that subjugation is the sheer power, the extreme force of the lawlessness. And we see that Sensloi, the lawlessness, snatches Una from the hold of hypocrisy. Actually, the lawlessness snatches truth away from the hold of hypocrisy. And we see that here the reason or the primitive courage that is represented by the lion, he can't assist truth against the superior force of the lawlessness, and he is being killed by the Sensloi. And we see that lawlessness kills reason or courage and seeks to hold truth under its power. And this very lawlessness is seeking always to violate the honor of truth by its extreme force. So this is the fate of truth when it is detached from the holiness. This is the destiny. This is the fortune of the truth when it is detached from the holiness. And holiness is the only friend who can defend the honor of truth. So deprived of the assistance of holiness, truth becomes victim to hypocrisy and lawlessness. On the other side, we see that falsehood that is being represented by Dwesa leads holiness towards the house of pride. That is basically a collection of ancient and medieval thoughts about the sin and evil. In Christian theology, they hold the belief that pride is the greatest sin from which all other vices come. And basically pride is and pride was the sin of Satan, which caused his fall from the heaven. And here queen of the pride, Lucifera, that is associated with the Lucifer by her name. And we also see the 7 deadly or 7 major vices or sins, that are idleness, gluttony, lechery, avarice, envy, and wrath. And these very major vices or sins are driven by Satan, the arch evil, the central evil. And each of these characters are with some props or costumes to indicate their nature. And here we see the encounter of the holiness with sense joy, that is the embodiment of joylessness or anxiety. Holiness surrounded by these very evils like the pride and other major sins is being challenged by anxiety, and holiness, though much weakened by its association with falsehood, is yet strong enough to meet joylessness and overcome it, but only after great labor, and we see a very hard battle. After that, holiness wins over on the joylessness or anxiety. So this shows that holiness without the guiding hand of truth, and while associating itself with falsehood, is very easy target for the temptations of the pride and other evils that are flowing from this pride. And holiness is always threatened with the hopelessness because of its separation from the truth and its association with the falsehood. So dear students, up till now we have studied some of the characters and some of the events, how these very characters and events which we studied in our previous lectures for its literal meaning now represents some deep concepts and symbolically represents something else. In this Faerie Queen we have studied these concepts, and I hope that now we will be having a better understanding of these ideas, these complex ideas, and because we have tried to comprehend them. So thank you very much for listening passionately. I hope that now you will be having the basic understanding of the allegory in the book 1, and for complete understanding of the book 1 we will study some other points in the second lecture. Thank you very much.